The emergency sirens had been wailing for 3 hours when Marcus Rodriguez made the decision that would save 16 lives. As head of security for the Central Metro station, he'd seen his share of emergencies, but nothing like the chaos erupting above ground. Through the security monitors, he watched as crowds of people fled through the streets, some stumbling with an unnatural gait, others running in pure terror. The last train had departed 20 minutes ago, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to abandon his post. Not when Dr. Sarah Chen was frantically trying to reach the CDC on her phone, her medical bag clutched tightly in her free hand. "The cellular towers are down," Sarah announced, her voice echoing through the nearly empty station. She'd been traveling to a conference when the outbreak began, and now found herself trapped with a group of strangers who looked to her for answers she didn't have. Marcus watched as she approached the small cluster of survivors huddled near the information kiosk. Elena, whose pregnancy was clearly showing, kept one protective hand on her belly while holding her husband's hand with the other. Tommy, barely 17, clutched his skateboard like a shield. An elderly couple named Frank and Margaret sat on a bench, their travel bags forgotten at their feet. And scattered throughout the platform were 8 others: commuters, a food vendor, a maintenance worker, all bound together by circumstance and fear. The lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the tiled walls as Marcus made his announcement. "The upper levels are compromised," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. "But down here we're safe. These tunnels were built to withstand disasters, and the emergency protocols are designed to keep us protected for at least 72 hours. He gestured toward the heavy security doors that separated the platform from the tunnels beyond. "Those doors are reinforced steel, and I'm the only one with the access codes." Dr. Chin stepped forward, her scientific mind already working through the implications. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," she said, addressing the group. "From what I observed before the communications went down, this appears to be some kind of rapid-onset neurological condition. The affected individuals show signs of extreme aggression, loss of higher cognitive function, and—" she paused, choosing her words carefully, "an apparent disregard for personal safety that borders on the suicidal." Tommy shifted nervously on his feet. "You mean like zombies? Because that's what they looked like to me. My mom always said I watched too many horror movies, but those people upstairs." His voice trailed off as he remembered the last glimpse he'd caught of the street level before Marcus had sealed the emergency exits. "We don't use that word," Sarah replied firmly. "We deal in facts, not fiction. What we know is that we're safe down here, and we need to work together to stay that way." She turned to Marcus. "What kind of supplies do we have access to?" Marcus led them through a mental inventory of their resources. The station's emergency supplies included water for a week, basic first aid materials, and enough emergency rations for 3 days, assuming normal consumption. There were also maintenance supplies, basic tools, and most importantly, the station's backup power system that could keep essential systems running for up to 2 weeks. "The ventilation system is independent of the surface," he explained, "and the water comes from a deep aquifer that's completely separate from the city supply." As night fell above ground, though time felt different in the eternal fluorescent twilight of the underground, the group established their temporary community. Elena's husband, David, proved handy with electronics and began working with Marcus to expand their monitoring capabilities using the station's security system. Frank, despite his age, revealed himself to be a retired engineer who understood the tunnel systems better than anyone. Margaret organized their meager food supplies with military precision, while Tommy surprised everyone by volunteering to help with whatever needed doing. But it was the sounds that truly drove home their situation. The distant echoes from above that filtered down through ventilation shafts and elevator shafts. Scraping, moaning, and occasionally the terrifying sound of something heavy hitting the sealed entrance doors. Dr. Chin found herself listening intently to these sounds, her medical training compelling her to analyze every audio clue about the condition of those above. "We'll take this one day at a time," Marcus announced as they settled in for their first night underground. "Tomorrow we'll assess our situation and make plans. But for now we're alive, we're together, and we're safe." None of them could have predicted that their temporary refuge would become the foundation for humanity's last stand, or that the echoes from the tunnel would soon carry both their salvation and their greatest test. The second day underground began with Tommy's discovery that would change everything. While exploring the maintenance areas with Marcus, the teenager had found an old emergency radio system tucked away in a utility closet. Equipment that predated the station's modern communication networks but still functioned on emergency frequencies. "My dad was a ham radio operator," Tommy explained as he carefully adjusted the analog dials, his fingers moving with surprising expertise. He taught me the basics before the divorce. The static crackled through the small speaker, and then, like a miracle breaking through the white noise, came a human voice. This is Haven Station calling any survivors. Haven Station on emergency frequency 77.5. We have medical supplies and 17 people safe underground. Please respond. Dr. Chin rushed to the radio as Tommy handed her the microphone, her hands trembling with a mixture of hope and scientific curiosity. She keyed the transmission carefully. Haven Station, this is Dr. Sarah Chen at Central Metro. We have 16 survivors and urgent medical questions. What's your situation up there? The voice that responded belonged to Dr. Michael Torres, a veterinarian who had taken shelter in the Riverside Station with a group that included 2 nurses, a pharmacist, and several families with children. As the hours passed, their radio network expanded to include contact with 5 other groups scattered across the city's underground transit system. Each conversation revealed pieces of a horrifying puzzle that Dr. Chin methodically assembled in her notebook, her medical training driving her to catalog every detail. The timeline is consistent across all locations, she reported to the gathered survivors that evening, her voice steady despite the grim information she was sharing. The outbreak began simultaneously at multiple points throughout the city around 6:30 a.m. yesterday. Initial symptoms included severe headaches, disorientation, and aggressive behavior. Full transformation appears to occur within 12 to 18 hours of exposure. She paused, looking around at the faces illuminated by the emergency lighting. But here's what's interesting, and potentially hopeful. Dr. Torres reports that the affected individuals seem to avoid the underground areas. They show a marked preference for remaining at street level and above. Marcus had been using the information from their radio contacts to create a comprehensive map of the city's current state, marking safe zones, compromised areas, and potential routes between survivor enclaves. According to the group at Industrial Station, the infected don't seem to use tools or show problem-solving abilities, he added. They're drawn to movement and sound, but they can't figure out how to operate complex mechanisms like the emergency door systems. Elena, now in her second day underground, had been listening to the radio communications with growing concern. My sister lives in the Northside District, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Has anyone made contact with survivors in that area? The silence that followed was answer enough. David wrapped his arm around her shoulders as she struggled to maintain her composure, the reality of their situation settling over the group like a heavy blanket. It was Margaret who broke the silence with practical wisdom. We can't save everyone, she said gently, but we can save ourselves and help those we can reach. These radio contacts, they're not just sources of information. They're the beginning of something bigger. She gestured toward Tommy, who was still monitoring the radio frequencies with dedicated attention. This boy has given us something more valuable than supplies or weapons. He's given us hope and connection. Throughout the night, Tommy and Frank worked together to improve their radio setup, extending their range and establishing regular check-in schedules with other survivor groups. Frank's engineering background proved invaluable as he explained how they could use the station's infrastructure to create a more powerful transmission system. The metro system was designed with redundant communication networks, he explained while sketching diagrams on a napkin. If we can tap into the fiber optic cables that run through these tunnels, we might be able to establish data connections with other stations. By dawn of their third day, a concept that had become abstract in their fluorescent-lit world, they had established regular contact with 7 survivor groups totaling over 90 people. Dr. Chin had compiled a comprehensive database of symptoms, timelines, and survival strategies, while Marcus had coordinated security protocols across all connected locations. The isolated group of strangers who had huddled together in fear just 48 hours earlier had become the communication hub for an emerging underground network. We're not just survivors anymore, Marcus announced as they gathered for their morning briefing. We're the foundation of something new. Every voice we hear on that radio, every person we help coordinate with other groups, every piece of information we gather, it all matters. We're not just waiting to be rescued. We're building the rescue. The echoes from the tunnel had become more than just sounds of the past. They were carrying the voices of the future. The alarm that shattered their 4th morning underground wasn't the familiar wail of the city's emergency sirens. It was Marcus's improvised warning system, a series of motion sensors he'd rigged throughout the outer tunnels. The piercing electronic beep echoed through the station as he rushed to the security monitors, his face going pale as he watched the display. There in the maintenance tunnel, he announced, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. Section C7, about 200 meters from our position. Dr. Chen looked up from her radio conversation with the industrial station group, her scientific composure cracking for the first time since the outbreak began. Through the security feed, they could see 3 figures moving through the narrow maintenance corridor with that distinctive lurching gait they'd only heard described in radio transmissions. The infected had somehow found their way into the tunnel system through a ventilation shaft that Marcus had deemed too small to be a threat. How is that possible? Frank demanded, his engineering mind struggling to process the breach. Those shafts are barely 18 inches wide. But Tommy, who had been monitoring the radio chatter from other stations, provided the grim answer. Riverside Station reported the same thing yesterday, he said, his teenage voice cracking with stress. They can dislocate their joints, compress their bodies. Dr. Torres said they watched one squeeze through a gap that should have been impossible. Elena, now visibly struggling with the stress of her pregnancy, gripped David's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "What do we do?" she whispered, her other hand protective over her belly. The question hung in the air as Marcus made rapid calculations, his security training warring with the unprecedented nature of their situation. "We seal the inner doors and hope the outer barriers hold," Marcus decided, but even as he spoke they could hear the distinctive sound of metal being torn and twisted. The infected weren't just mindlessly wandering through the tunnels. They were systematically dismantling the obstacles in their path with a determination that suggested more intelligence than anyone had previously reported. Margaret, who had remained remarkably calm throughout their underground ordeal, stepped forward with quiet authority. "We need to evacuate to the deepest level," she said, her voice steady despite the approaching danger. "The old service tunnels Frank showed us yesterday, they're more defensible and there's only one way in or out." Her practical thinking cut through the panic as the group began their frantic but organized retreat. Tommy grabbed the radio equipment while Frank gathered his improvised tools and diagrams. Dr. Chen clutched her medical supplies and research notes, her scientific documentation of the outbreak now more precious than gold. As they moved deeper into the station's bowels, the sounds from above grew more intense. The screech of metal, the hollow thump of bodies against barriers, and underneath it all, a low vocalization that was almost human but not quite. "The motion sensors in Section C5 just went active," Marcus reported, checking his handheld monitoring device as they descended. "They're moving faster than we estimated." The group's movements became more urgent as Elena struggled with the stairs, her pregnancy making the rapid descent treacherous. David and Margaret flanked her, providing support while Frank led the way with his intimate knowledge of the tunnel system. The service tunnel they reached was a relic from the original subway construction. Narrow, low-ceilinged, and lined with pipes and electrical conduits that created a maze-like environment. "This is good," Frank announced, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Only one access point and I can seal it from the inside." But as they settled into their new refuge, the radio crackled with urgent transmissions from other survivor groups. "Central Metro, this is Haven Station. We're seeing similar breaches at multiple locations. The infected are accessing the tunnel system through maintenance shafts across the city." Dr. Torres's voice carried a note of controlled panic that mirrored their own situation. "We need to coordinate our response or we'll be picked off one by one." The sounds from above had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Dr. Chen pressed her ear to the wall, listening intently before pulling away with a troubled expression. "They're not randomly searching," she concluded. "The sounds suggest they're mapping the area, learning the layout. This isn't mindless behavior, there's a pattern, a purpose." As their first night in the deeper tunnels began, Elena suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. "Something's wrong," she whispered, and Dr. Chen rushed to her side as David called out in alarm. The stress of the breach, combined with the challenging conditions of their underground existence, had triggered early labor. In the darkness of their refuge, with the infected somewhere above and a new life demanding to enter their dangerous world, the small group of survivors faced their greatest test yet. The birth of Elena's daughter in the depths of the service tunnel marked a turning point that none of them could have anticipated. As Dr. Chen carefully cleaned the newborn while Elena recovered from her labor, Frank made a discovery that would reshape their understanding of their underground world. "These service tunnels don't just connect to our station," he announced, his voice echoing with excitement as he traced routes on his hand-drawn maps. "They're part of the original subway system. There's a network of maintenance passages that links every station in the downtown core." Marcus looked up from his vigil at the tunnel entrance, where he'd been monitoring for any signs of the infected above. You're saying we can travel between stations without going to the surface? The implications were staggering. For the past 4 days, they'd viewed themselves as isolated survivors, but Frank's revelation suggested they were actually part of a much larger underground sanctuary. Tommy, who had managed to keep their radio communications active even during the evacuation, began coordinating with other survivor groups to test Frank's theory. Haven Station, this is Central Metro. We need you to check for service tunnel access in your lower levels. Look for maintenance doors marked with original construction dates from the 1940s. The response came back within 20 minutes, Dr. Torres's voice filled with wonder. We found them. There are 3 separate tunnel branches down here, and they all lead in different directions. Over the following hours, what had been isolated pockets of survivors began to reveal itself as an interconnected community. The Industrial Station Group had found a tunnel that connected to the Financial District Station, where 12 more survivors had been hiding. The Riverside Group discovered passages that led to both the University Station and the Hospital Station, where a remarkable find awaited them. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a pediatrician who had been trapped with her medical residents when the outbreak began. We're not just talking about communication anymore, Dr. Chin observed as she cradled Elena's sleeping daughter. We're looking at the possibility of a genuine underground society. The baby, whom Elena had named Hope, seemed to symbolize the transformation from survival to something approaching normal life. David had fashioned a makeshift crib from supply containers, while Margaret had organized a system of shifts to ensure the infant was always cared for. Frank's engineering expertise became invaluable as he began mapping the entire tunnel network, creating detailed diagrams that showed not just the connections between stations but also the locations of electrical systems, water sources, and storage areas. The original designers built these tunnels to be self-sufficient, he explained while sketching additional routes. Each section has its own power grid, water access, and ventilation system. We're essentially living in a city that was designed to function independently. Marcus took charge of coordinating security across the expanding network, establishing regular patrol schedules and communication protocols. We need to think like a military unit now, he explained during one of their evening briefings. Each station becomes a stronghold, each tunnel a supply line. If we can control the underground, we can start planning for more than just survival. His security background proved perfect for organizing the scattered groups into a cohesive defensive network. The most significant breakthrough came when Tommy made contact with the airport station group, who had been isolated since the outbreak began. They have a working medical facility, he reported excitedly. Dr. Walsh from Hospital Station says she can set up a proper maternity ward there, and they have enough supplies to treat serious injuries. The prospect of real medical care transformed their entire perspective on their situation. Dr. Chin began coordinating medical information across all connected stations, creating a comprehensive database of symptoms, treatments, and survival strategies. We're not just documenting this outbreak anymore, she announced during a network-wide radio conference. We're building the foundation for recovery. Every observation, every successful treatment, every adaptation we make, it's all going to be crucial when we start rebuilding. The tunnel system that had initially seemed like a temporary refuge was rapidly becoming humanity's new frontier. Elena, now recovered from childbirth, watched her daughter sleep peacefully in their underground haven. She'll never know the world we lost, she said softly, but maybe the world we're building will be better. By the end of their first week underground, the network had expanded to include 11 stations with over 150 survivors. They had established regular supply runs through the tunnels, coordinated medical care, and created a communication system that rivaled anything they'd had on the surface. Marcus's evening announcement captured the magnitude of their transformation. We came down here as refugees, but we're becoming something else entirely. We're the foundation of what comes next. The echoes from the tunnel now carried the sounds of construction, conversation, and the cry of new life, the first generation of the underground world. The decision to venture back to the surface came when their medical supplies reached critically low levels. Despite the growing network of survivors and the relative safety of their tunnel system, certain resources could only be obtained from above ground. Dr. Chin had compiled a detailed list of essential medications, particularly antibiotics for treating minor infections that were becoming problematic in their confined environment. We need these supplies within 48 hours, she announced during the morning briefing, her voice carrying the weight of medical authority. Without proper antibiotics, even minor cuts could become life-threatening. Marcus studied the surface reconnaissance reports they'd gathered from radio communications with other survivor groups. The infected show predictable movement patterns, he explained, spreading hand-drawn maps across their makeshift table. They're most active during daylight hours and seem to congregate in open areas. Early morning, just after dawn, appears to be our safest window. Tommy, who had volunteered for the mission despite his age, nodded with determination that reminded everyone how much the teenager had matured during their underground ordeal. The preparation took 12 hours of careful planning. Frank had identified a maintenance exit that emerged near the Central Medical Complex, a facility that should contain everything on Dr. Chen's list. The exit is concealed behind a utility building, he explained, tracing the route on his detailed tunnel maps. You'll have approximately 200 meters of open ground to cover, but the medical complex has multiple entry points if the main doors are compromised. Margaret approached Tommy before the mission, pressing a small photograph into his hands. "This is my grandson," she said quietly. "He worked as a pharmacy technician at Central Medical. If you find any evidence of survivors there." Her voice trailed off, but Tommy understood the unspoken request. The personal stakes of their mission added emotional weight to what was already a dangerous undertaking. The ascent to the surface felt like emerging into an alien world. Marcus led the way, his security training evident in every careful movement, while Tommy followed with a backpack full of empty containers and Dr. Chen's detailed supply list. The morning air carried strange sounds, not the familiar noise of city life, but an unsettling combination of silence punctuated by distant moans and the scraping of feet against pavement. What they discovered at the medical complex exceeded their worst fears and provided their first real clues about the outbreak's origin. The facility had been systematically ransacked, but not by looters, by someone with intimate knowledge of where the most dangerous materials were stored. "This isn't random destruction," Marcus observed as they navigated through the pharmacy. "Someone knew exactly what they were looking for." Tommy found the evidence that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. In the facility's administrative office, scattered among overturned desks and broken equipment, lay a series of shipping documents dated just days before the outbreak. "Marcus, you need to see this," he called out, his voice tight with concern. The documents revealed that the medical complex had been receiving regular shipments of experimental compounds from the city's water treatment facility, compounds that were supposed to be disposed of safely but had instead been diverted for unauthorized research. The medical supplies they gathered were substantial, but the information they uncovered was even more valuable. As they prepared to return to the tunnels, Marcus made a discovery that sent chills through both of them. In the facility's security office, the surveillance system was still partially functional, powered by emergency batteries. The footage from the day of the outbreak showed Dr. Harrison Webb, the facility's research director, deliberately contaminating the water supply with a substance that caused immediate neurological changes in test subjects. He didn't just fail to contain something, Tommy realized as they watched the grainy footage. He released it on purpose. The implications were staggering. This wasn't an accident or a natural disaster. It was a deliberate act of terrorism that had transformed their entire city into a nightmare landscape. Their return journey through the tunnels was completed in record time, both men driven by the urgency of sharing their discoveries. The medical supplies were distributed immediately to Dr. Chin, but it was the documentation they'd found that truly electrified the survivor network. "We're not dealing with a random outbreak," Marcus announced during an emergency broadcast to all connected stations. "We're dealing with sabotage, and somewhere out there the person responsible might still be alive." Dr. Chin examined the documents with scientific precision, her medical training helping her understand the full scope of what had been done. "The contamination affects the city's entire water supply," she concluded. "But the treatment facility has protocols for emergency purification. If we can reach it and reverse the contamination process, we might be able to start reclaiming the surface." The echoes from the tunnel now carried a new sound, the whisper of hope that their underground refuge might not be permanent after all. The revelation of Dr. Webb's sabotage transformed their underground network from a collection of refugee camps into a unified resistance movement. Within hours of Marcus and Tommy's return, every connected station was buzzing with activity as survivors processed the implications of what they'd learned. "We're not just hiding anymore," announced Dr. Chin during an emergency network-wide conference, her voice carrying through the radio system that had become their lifeline. "We have a target, we have a mission, and we have the knowledge to fight back." Elena, now recovered from childbirth and energized by the possibility of reclaiming the surface world for her daughter, had emerged as an unexpected leader in coordinating supplies and logistics across the network. "If we're going to mount an operation against the water treatment facility, "We need to think like a military unit," she declared, her maternal instincts channeled into protective fury. "Every station needs to contribute resources, expertise, and personnel. This isn't about individual survival anymore, it's about taking back our world." The airport station group, led by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had become the network's medical command center. Their facility included not just treatment areas but also a makeshift laboratory where Dr. Chen had relocated to analyze the contaminated water samples that Marcus and Tommy had retrieved. "The compound Webb used is synthetic," she reported during one of their daily briefings. "It's designed to bind with specific neuroreceptors and alter brain chemistry permanently. But synthetic means it can potentially be neutralized with the right countermeasures." Frank's engineering expertise proved invaluable as he began designing a comprehensive assault plan for the water treatment facility. "The contamination system has multiple redundancies," he explained, his aged hands steady as he sketched technical diagrams. "Webb didn't just poison the water. He rigged the entire facility to maintain contamination levels indefinitely. We'll need to disable at least 6 separate injection points and restore the original purification protocols." Tommy had become the network's primary intelligence coordinator, using his technical skills to monitor surface communications and track infected movement patterns. "The infected aren't just wandering randomly," he reported during one of their evening strategy sessions. "They're congregating around key infrastructure points, including the water treatment facility. It's like they're guarding the source of their own contamination." His observation sent a chill through the assembled survivors as they realized the infected retained enough intelligence to protect their origin point. The most significant development came when Margaret made contact with a previously unknown survivor group, military personnel from the National Guard depot who had been trapped in their underground bunker since the outbreak began. "This is Sergeant Maria Rodriguez from the 42nd Engineering Battalion," came the voice over the radio, professional and crisp despite the circumstances. "We have 47 personnel, military-grade equipment, and detailed knowledge of the water treatment facility's security systems." The alliance with the military survivors changed everything. Sergeant Rodriguez's team included specialists in chemical decontamination, explosive ordnance disposal, and urban warfare tactics. "We've been monitoring the facility for the past week," she reported during their first joint planning session. "The infected presence is heaviest during daylight hours, but they maintain a perimeter guard at all times. Any assault will need to be coordinated, fast, and absolutely precise." David, who had been quietly supporting Elena while caring for their newborn, surprised everyone by revealing his background in computer systems. "I worked on the original automation systems for the water treatment facility," he announced during one of their technical planning sessions. "I know how to restore the original programming and bypass Webb's modifications. But I'll need to access the central control room to do it." As their alliance grew to include over 200 survivors across 12 connected stations, personal relationships that had formed in crisis began to deepen into something approaching family. Marcus found himself drawn to Dr. Chen's quiet strength and scientific determination, while Tommy had developed a protective relationship with Elena's daughter that reminded everyone of the future they were fighting for. Margaret and Frank had become the group's unofficial grandparents, their wisdom and experience providing stability in the chaos. The planning reached a crescendo when Dr. Chen made a breakthrough in her analysis of the contamination compound. "I've identified the neutralizing agent," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's a common industrial chemical that should be available in the facility's own supply storage. If we can introduce it into the water system at the right concentration, we can not only stop the contamination but potentially reverse some of the effects on the infected." "Then we have everything we need," Marcus concluded, looking around at the faces of people who had become his extended family. "We have the knowledge, the expertise, the personnel, and now the solution. Tomorrow we start planning the operation that will take back our city." The echoes from the tunnel now carried the sounds of preparation, weapons being cleaned, equipment being tested, and voices united in purpose as they prepared for humanity's counterattack. The attack came without warning at 3:47 a.m. on what should have been their final day of preparation. Tommy was monitoring the radio frequencies when the first distress calls began flooding in from the outer stations. "This is University Station. We're under massive assault. They're coming through every tunnel entrance simultaneously." The panic in the voice was unmistakable, and within minutes, similar calls were coming from Financial District, Riverside, and industrial stations. Marcus rushed to the communication center where Tommy was frantically coordinating with all connected stations. "It's not random," the teenager reported, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. They're hitting all the peripheral stations at once, but they're leaving the central hub stations untouched. It's like they're trying to drive us toward the center. The tactical implications were terrifying. Somehow, the infected had not only discovered their tunnel network but had developed a coordinated strategy to attack it. Dr. Chen's medical training kicked in as she began organizing triage stations throughout their facility. "We need to prepare for wounded from all the outer stations," she announced, her hands already moving to organize their expanded medical supplies. "Elena, I need you to coordinate evacuation routes for the children and pregnant women. Margaret, help me set up multiple treatment areas." The underground sanctuary that had felt so secure was rapidly becoming a battlefield. Frank's engineering knowledge became crucial as he analyzed the attack patterns. "They're not just trying to overrun us," he concluded, studying the reports from each station. "They're systematically targeting our infrastructure. Power lines, water supplies, communication equipment. Someone is directing this assault." His words sent chills through the command team as they realized the infected retained far more intelligence than anyone had suspected. Sergeant Rodriguez's military team immediately mobilized to coordinate the defense. "All stations, this is command. Implement Protocol Delta, fighting retreat to central positions. Do not attempt to hold the outer perimeters. Repeat, controlled retreat to central stations." Her professional calm provided a stable anchor in the chaos as survivor groups began their desperate withdrawal through the tunnel system. The retreat was a nightmare of running battles fought in narrow corridors and maintenance shafts. David, carrying baby Hope while supporting Elena, found himself separated from the main group as they fled through the industrial station tunnels. "The infected are using the ventilation system," he reported over the radio, his voice breathless as they took shelter in an abandoned storage room. "They're not just in the tunnels, they're above us, below us, everywhere." It was Frank who made the decision that would save the central stations but cost him his life. "I can seal the main junction tunnels," he announced, his elderly voice carrying grim determination. "The blast doors were designed to contain flooding, but they'll work against this kind of assault too. I just need to reach the central control station." Marcus immediately objected, but Frank was already moving toward the most dangerous section of the tunnels. Tommy's voice crackled over the radio as he coordinated the final evacuations. "All outer stations, report your status. We're implementing emergency seal protocols in 60 seconds." The responses painted a picture of heroic last stands. Survivors buying time for others to escape, medical personnel staying behind to treat the wounded, and ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of courage. The sound of the blast doors sealing echoed through the entire tunnel system like thunder. Frank's sacrifice had successfully isolated the central stations, but at the cost of trapping himself and 17 other survivors in the outer sections. "Frank, respond. Frank, are you there?" Marcus called into the radio, but only static answered. The old engineer had given his life to save the network he had helped create. Dr. Chin found herself treating wounded survivors in conditions that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. "We've lost contact with 4 stations," she reported while bandaging a severe laceration on a teenage survivor from University Station. "But the central hub is secure, and we still have over 100 people safe in the deep tunnels." Her medical expertise was being pushed to its limits as she worked to save lives with limited resources. Elena clutched her daughter close as the sounds of battle echoed through the tunnels above them. "They found us," she whispered to David. "After everything we built, they found us." But Margaret, despite her grief over Frank's sacrifice, refused to accept defeat. "They found our outer defenses," she corrected. "But they didn't find our heart. Frank didn't sacrifice himself so we could give up, he did it so we could fight back." As dawn broke on the surface world above, the surviving members of their network gathered in the deepest and most secure section of the central station. They had lost friends, lost territory, and lost their sense of security, but they had not lost their resolve. Marcus looked around at the faces of the survivors, tired, grieving, but unbroken. "Frank bought us time," he announced. "Now we use it. The assault on the water treatment facility happens today." The assault on the water treatment facility began at dawn, exactly 12 hours after Frank's sacrifice had sealed their fate and their resolve. Marcus led the surface team with military precision, his security background complemented by Sergeant Rodriguez's tactical expertise and David's intimate knowledge of the facility's systems. "Remember," Dr. Chen's voice crackled through their radio headsets as they approached the contaminated complex, "we only get one chance at this. The neutralizing agent has to be introduced at exactly the right concentration, or we risk making the contamination worse." The facility was heavily guarded by infected, but their behavior patterns had become predictable after weeks of observation. Tommy, monitoring from the underground command center, provided real-time intelligence as the assault team navigated through the industrial complex. Patrol group moving past the main entrance in 30 seconds, he reported, his teenage voice now carrying the confidence of someone who had found his calling in crisis. Eastern approach is clear for the next 2 minutes. Dr. Chin had remained in the tunnels, not because she lacked courage, but because her medical expertise was needed to treat the wounded from the previous night's battle and to monitor the neutralization process remotely. The chemical reaction should begin within 15 minutes of introduction, she explained to Elena, who was helping coordinate the underground support operations while caring for her daughter. If David's calculations are correct, we should start seeing effects on the infected within an hour. The breakthrough came when David successfully accessed the central control room, his fingers flying across keyboards that he had helped design years earlier. "I'm in," he announced, his voice tight with concentration. "Beginning the neutralization sequence now." The facility's automated systems, dormant since Webb's sabotage, began to hum back to life as David systematically restored the original purification protocols and introduced Dr. Chen's neutralizing compound. Marcus and his team held the perimeter as the facility's massive pumps began circulating the treated water through the city's supply system. "We're seeing movement changes in the infected," Sergeant Rodriguez reported, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "They're becoming disoriented, less aggressive. Some are just sitting down." The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. The infected were beginning to show signs of cognitive recovery. Underground, Margaret had organized the survivors into work crews that were already planning the expansion of their tunnel society. "We're not just waiting for the surface to be safe again," she announced to the assembled survivors. "We're building something new down here. These tunnels aren't just our refuge, they're our foundation." Her words resonated with people who had discovered that their underground community offered advantages that surface life had never provided. The first real sign of success came when Tommy's radio intercepted a transmission from the surface. A human voice, speaking clearly and rationally. "This is Dr. Patricia Williams from St. Mary's Hospital. Is anyone out there? We have 17 recovered patients and medical staff who need assistance." The voice was followed by others, scattered reports of people regaining consciousness, confused but human once again. Elena stood in the main tunnel hub, baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, and watched as survivors began to organize their new society. "She'll grow up in a world we couldn't have imagined," she said to Dr. Chin, who was monitoring the surface recovery reports. "Underground cities, tunnel networks, a community that values cooperation over competition." The baby stirred in her arms and Elena smiled. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The water treatment facility's success had effects beyond just neutralizing the contamination. As the infected began to recover, they retained fragmented memories of their time in the altered state, providing valuable intelligence about the outbreak's progression and effects. Dr. Chin found herself at the center of a massive research effort, documenting not just the recovery process but the social innovations that had emerged from their underground survival. Marcus stood in the central command center, watching the monitors that now showed both surface and underground activity. "We saved the city," he said to Tommy, who was coordinating with newly established surface survivor groups. "But more than that, we proved that people can build something better when they work together." The teenager nodded, his face showing the maturity that crisis had forced upon him. As the sun set on their first day of success, the underground society had evolved into something unprecedented, a functioning community that spanned both the tunnels and the gradually recovering surface. Frank's sacrifice had saved more than just lives. It had preserved the foundation of a new kind of civilization. The echoes from the tunnel now carried the sounds of children playing, people working, and Hope babbling her first words in the fluorescent-lit corridors that had become humanity's unexpected salvation. The lost metro had indeed become the line between chaos and hope, but it had also become something more, the birthplace of a world where survival and compassion could coexist, where the depths of human ingenuity could transform even the darkest crisis into the dawn of something extraordinary.